So our agenda for today is really give us a chance to share with you about some best practices. We've verified over 500 articulation agreements in the UW system. Almost all of these are between Wisconsin Technical College districts and UWs. Now, we also record articulation agreements between UWs and other colleges and universities when we receive them. In addition, there are hundreds more transfer agreements that, while not a formal articulation agreement, they do serve as transfer guides and course-based agreements between institutions. Our focus today is on what we would consider the true articulation agreement. In part one of this webinar, we'll share with you the policy and the rationale behind that policy and good articulation practices. We'll share the essential characteristics of an articulation agreement and some models and tools that you can use as you're building articulation agreements with your district institutions. In part two, we will share information about the UW system notification, publication, and validation process, as well as some practice models for internal and external planning at the institution level. You may notice if you see the attendee list that we are welcoming colleagues from both UW institutions and Wisconsin Technical College districts. To our UW colleagues, we know you're on the ground with this, and we hope this webinar will serve as a refresher and provide you with some additional tools. And again, we encourage you to share the resources with academic departments on your campus. To our technical college colleagues, we hope this webinar increases your knowledge and will give you a glimpse as to the UW system policies and processes that we see critical to articulation agreements. So we know you're all working to develop these agreements, and I can certainly share a system perspective and observation, but clearly we're all co-creators of knowledge in this. I'd like to thank a couple of doing quite a lot of work in this area and who contributed resources and ideas to today's webinar. Lindy Young from UW Stout has been working in the area of transfer for just a little while, and she has provided a lot of excellent resources, and we've posted these resources, so many thanks to you, Linda. Also, UW Milwaukee and the Registrar's Office, Brian Hinshaw and Seth Sladika, have also been active in this area, and we'll take a look at a format they created for their articulation agreement template. We encourage all of you to share your ideas today as well during the discussion time. And finally, I want to recognize a couple people here at System Administration, Katie Banks, who coordinated this webinar, as well as Ann Fisher, who with Katie really have gone through to maintain our database and our web resources. So here we go. Just to remember that all of the resources we talk about today, as well as the public-facing pieces, whenever I say an articulation agreement is published, we're talking about our Transfer Wisconsin web portal, and that's the entry point that you find off of from the URL wisconsin.edu/transfer. Now, this is not news to you. Yet I'm always surprised how many people are not aware of the array of credit transfer services available to our students. So this is a visual that I often use with audiences who are less familiar with transfer, and I share it with this group that is very aware with transfer in case it can be a resource to you as you're talking with people on your campuses. Also, for the purposes of this program, it reminds us how interconnected these services are. Agreements. We'll use the terminology course-based to describe 300,000 credit transfer equivalencies that are associated to single courses and stored in the Transfer Information System database. And many, if not all, articulation agreements reference back this database to find additional credit transfer information. We'll use program-based to describe our articulation agreements between technical colleges and UWs, and as well as our UW College Transfer Guides. We'll talk more about the differences between these types of agreements in a bit. And we also like to emphasize the value of associate degree completion, which is an assumed practice within the context of articulation agreements. It also, the area also represents the UW colleges, Associate of Arts and Sciences degree transfer, and our other UW institutions, associate degrees that are transferable and will satisfy general education requirements at the receiving baccalaureate granting institution, as well as the Technical College, Liberal Arts, AA, and AS. When the associate degree isn't completed, we really like to emphasize the potential for reverse transfer agreements, and I think that there could be opportunity for this within the context of articulation agreements as well. Finally, the Universal Credit Transfer Agreement is an option open to students who may not exactly be clear about their transfer pathways, and it currently features 11 course subject sets that are universally transferable between technical colleges and UWs. So our transfer policy, all transfer in the University of Wisconsin system is guided by these two sets, 6.0 and ACIS 6.2. For those of you unfamiliar with these policies, there's links on the resource page. 6.0 includes principles of accommodations for students transferring among UWs and between a technical college and UW. It's the policy that sets the general guideline of the 72 credits that may be transferable from a non-baccalaureate institution. And the policy also acknowledges the need for institutions to align credit transfer policies with residence requirements on the UW campus and HLC assumed practices. Finally, it describes limitation to credit transfer to satisfy competency requirements, upper-level GE requirements, or major prerequisite requirements. The purpose of 6.2 is to ease transfer pathways for students completing a technical college program, most often an AAS. And while 6.2 discusses technical college to UW transfer, the principles are applicable to program-to-program transfer agreements with other institutions as well. So what is an articulation agreement? The term articulation agreement means different things to different people across higher ed. And depending on where you came from before you landed in the position you're in, you may think about it differently as well. 6.2 clarifies what we mean by it. It applies to transfer of credits from one specific degree program to one specific degree program, usually an associate degree to a bachelor degree. It only applies to transfer between those two programs. It presumes completion and assumes that the programs are completed in succession, not concurrently. Most importantly, it demonstrates a logical alignment of learning outcomes, and because the completion of a specific set of coursework is required, these articulation agreements can facilitate credit transfer of learning that may not occur in other instances. It also memorializes the recognition of the agreement and the credit transfer through a formal agreement. And I'd like to also add, when we receive information about articulation agreements, we see the bachelor degree granting institution as the source of the information. The key elements of an articulation agreement, you can find a complete summary of these elements in ACIS 6.2, and when we get to the template, you'll also notice that they are referenced in the template. What these elements do, it supports institutional understanding, meaning your faculty members' understanding, your advisors' understandings of the details of the agreement, and it promotes sort of a transparency and understanding for the end user. We want to make sure, first and foremost, that students are clear about the credit transfer, the conditions, and the limitations. Therefore, these some of the most important elements include this. We'd like that you specify the exact name of the degree program and the type as recorded by your institution. So we really prefer when you'll say a BS in business administration, rather a business degree. On the UW side, we link these back to the CDR. On the technical college side, to actually know what degree is being offered is important. Included, we also want to see a rationale about the program alignment. And this is not so much important to the student as the end user, but important, I think, to your departments and your faculty, especially if there's turnover before a program review. In addition, there's a lot of complexities around admissions, and these may vary. So the agreement should really include admission requirements or other relevant conditions to this agreement being in effect, such as prerequisites and residence requirements. It's important also to note limitations. If, let's say, your bachelor degree program is highly selective so that not all students who meet the admission requirements may be admitted, then it's good to signal to the student within the agreement so that they're aware that this agreement is applicable should they become admitted, and that the admission process is competitive. Also, we want agreements to be clear that the transfer agreement is limited to students enrolled in a specific major, so that if the student does decide to change majors, they understand that the credits may not transfer the same. And again, this goes back to the fact that these articulation agreements are created because of alignment of learning outcomes that go beyond just a course-to-course alignment. We ask that you be clear about the general education and major degree program requirements and what and how credits will apply to the degree. We also ask that you include effective dates, and we recommend that reviews for articulation agreements coincide with when the degree programs will be reviewed, and then finally the assurances of your institutional commitment. So here's a template. It's in your materials and will be much easier to read if you draw it from your materials. This is a template that we created for you to use and to adapt. We know that these agreements get created by the faculty. It's not uncommon for me to hear directly from a faculty member that is working on an articulation agreement. And though I always try to connect the person back to their articulation contact at their campus, this is something where you also know that these things are happening and it's very fluid. So it's a tool that you can give to faculty and departments on your campus so that they have something to go on to be guided as they're forming the articulation, and they're aware of the ingredients. And certainly you can, this is all in the Microsoft Word, so you can adapt and add things as you'd like. I think that we'll give you some examples in a moment of how two institutions have adapted models, and they work very well and have also some unique features. So one such template is the UW Stout template developed by Linda Young. It's also in your materials for review. It's formatted a bit differently than the UW system template, but it still includes all the essential elements. One thing I really like about the template is that it details the administrative assumptions around the establishment and review process. So notice in items A and B, it actually talks about how who is going to be entering this agreement and the effective dates and what are the conditions of it being in effect. It anticipates the review process in a couple ways. It understands that institutions will work with students if there are curricular changes that occur, and it provides assurances that both parties will work with students to address any changes. Finally, in item D, it's clear about when the agreement will be reviewed. On page 3 and 4 of the templates, UW Stout includes a good model to illustrate credit application by breaking it down into several tables. Table A speaks just to GE. Table B speaks to the major. Table C to the remaining requirements. D provides a nice summary that you see here in terms of total credits transferred. And then there's also a table that talks about non-transferable courses. And I think the interesting thing about this and what it makes it transparent to the student is that in some cases, they might be transferable to the institution, but they're just not applicable to the major. And so what's important is to transfer applicable courses.
Linda Young, I don't know
if you are on audio or not, but if you are, I know you created these templates, and maybe you can speak to what elements you see as most helpful to your students in advising. And again, I don't think Linda is, so
there I am.
Here you are.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I think the most helpful, because it's the question that gets asked of most students, is what do I have left? And so section C clearly defines that.
Yes, I would agree. I think that provides a really good summary, and the bottom line of what students want to know is what they would take once they get to the institution. So thanks, Linda. We'll come back around to you again. And for now, to just kind of control some background noise, Katie is going to put on mute. Okay, let's go to the Milwaukee example. So Milwaukee also has all of, in the example, you will find an example, I believe it's for an Associate of Applied Sciences and Graphic Design to the BA in Design Studies. You'll find it on the resource page. And a unique feature that I really like about the Milwaukee Agreement is that although it has all the other basic elements of an articulation agreement, it includes this nice summative table. And to what Linda was saying about, students really want to see what is it that I am going to need to take once I get to the bachelor degree granting institution. So this table at a glance lists both the general education and the major program requirements and shows the student exactly, can you go to the next slide, exactly what it is that, how many credits they are involved in the requirement, what will be fulfilled by the MATC associate degree, what still is to be completed by the and then in the comments section exactly what are the applicable courses. So it gives a nice at-a-glance view. In this, and you don't see it on screen right now, but if you look at the agreements, both in this and the other template examples, you'll find that students are guided back to TIS wizards, our transfer information system wizards, to be able to look up instructions about what might be applicable. On the last slide, there was under the, for example, natural studies that said any approved NS or NS plus course, which is related to a general education requirement at UWM. So that directs students back to the general education wizard so that they can actually query those specific general education areas and what might be transferable. So the bottom line, when you're evaluating an articulation agreement on your campus, and when we receive it here at UW System, this is what we look at. We look to see it's got all the essential elements that are included in 6.2. We ask, can a student and advisors understand it and see how it applies to them? And we want to make sure that it has applicable links so that the students can find additional resources. We really prefer to see that all the bachelor degree requirements are comprehensively listed. But in cases where that can't happen or you want to be sure that you have the most current information, at minimum a link back to those requirements. The common shortcomings or challenges that we see in agreements is that there's a lack of clarity in the agreement language. And here's some of the reasons why we might not be able to publish an agreement. The degrees are not clearly stated, or there's no signatures, and so we're not quite sure what to do with the agreement and what degree programs it applies to. It's not a true articulation agreement. It might illustrate a set of course-to-course transfers, and it might be a long list from one department or school to another department or school, but it's more of just a set of courses that transfer, and there's not a continuity in a package about how it applies to a specific degree program. We would therefore see that as a course-based transfer. There's also cases that we might reach out to a UW institution prior to publishing of the agreement if we don't see it has all the required elements and there's some vague language regarding blocks of credits, so that there's no specific indication of what courses will be applied to specific course requirements of the degree. And also if it's missing a URL, so that we are not able to link it directly to an articulation agreement at the UW school. Articulation agreements, I just want to again say, they assume completion of an associate degree program. There are some cases when it could be applicable to other degree programs. And I suppose there are some cases where the liberal studies transfer program is one such case that occurs to me, where you might have an agreement and you are going to honor that agreement even if the student doesn't complete the program, but they have to complete a certain set of something. Be clear about that in your agreements because we need to understand what actually needs to be completed for the agreement to be applied. Also, if there is a chance that the student might be dually enrolled for a bit or might just transfer early so they can start other degree requirements, we do encourage the utilization of reverse transfer agreements. So some other common types of agreements that articulation agreements get confused with and might put it into a different category. I talked a little bit about course-based, what we might say course-to-course agreements. And these are articulations of a sets of courses that transfer, but they aren't part of an actual agreement that speaks of one program to another. Our universal credit transfer agreement is certainly an agreement, and it's articulated, but it's a general set of 11 course subject sets that are transferable but aren't organized in a way that are applied to any specific degree. So it's, again, much more like a course-to-course transfer. And then there's transfer guides. And what makes transfer guides different, and it's just a fine line, I would agree, is that transfer guides more often anticipate pathways and don't presume completion of a credential first. It facilitates the credit transfer and the preparation of the student, so they're taking the right classes to get into the career pathway or major pathway degree program that they want to get into. But again, it doesn't presume completion, and it does not set any specific requirements regarding admission or other things that the student must do necessarily. It may, but not necessarily. We consider transfer guides as more of an advising tool, not as a transfer agreement, so we do publish links to transfer guides at a different section within our web portal. Then lastly, there's dual degree programs, and this is, again, one of those things where it's a fine line. What really differentiates an articulation agreement between a dual degree program is, while it's similar in that it's still two academic degree programs at two institutions of higher education, and each institution's offering a portion of the program, and there's also requirements about enrollment. The biggest difference is that they're concurrent. The student is concurrently enrolled at both institutions at least part of the time, and the credits transfer back and forth so that the student is concurrently pursuing 2 degrees. Now, it's possible that we could see something be an articulation agreement and part of a dual credit program, but I say this to you because if you do think that you have a degree program out there that's an articulation program and it's not published on our list and you think it should be, we can certainly talk about that, but we have noticed that some things get reported as dual degrees and some get reported as articulations. All right, so that's enough bullet points for now. I am going to, we're going to open up the lines and take Okay. Are there any questions regarding what constitutes an articulation agreement?
This is Jody McDermott at UW-Platteville. I don't have a question about that, but I do have another question.
Okay.
In ACIS 6.0, it states that we can only take 72 credits from a 2-year institution. Fine.
Generally.
But my question is, now that UW Extension and UW colleges are offering bachelor's degrees, can we take more than 72 credits from those institutions?
ACIS 6.0 says generally 72 credits, and exceptions may be made at the institution's discretion. So the answer to that is yes, you could go beyond 72. I would say you just need to attend to your accreditor requirements as well as your own institutional policies regarding residence. And then document the congruency. But again, that would be more for your accreditors. Any other questions? Okay. So we're going to keep moving along. Okay, and the next we're going to talk about our institutional processes. And this is one piece where I see sometimes there's a lot of turnover in terms of who works on these agreements at a particular campus. Sometimes I hear from technical college districts. Sometimes I hear from our UWs. I get a lot of information from multiple places. And so it strikes me that some best practices are to really ensure that if you haven't already done so at your own institution or on your campus, to establish what processes you have in place and the different steps that are to be taken in terms of developing articulations. And I think this is good with just the amount of turnover that we see in faculty and staff in general, and can really increase awareness of departments in terms of what are the steps and things that they should keep in mind when they're building these articulation agreements. We will have available on our web portal all of the resources that we're providing with you today, and so that is one place to direct. And we also welcome you to submit any other practices that you have or templates, and we're happy to share those out if you're willing to share them. Also, when informing or training or working with your departments, I think it's really imperative to include all departments in the conversation. And so that means that it goes beyond faculty to transfer advisors and admissions and registrars. And I have at times read agreements where it's coming from one place and it sounds like not everyone had been included in the discussion. So again, policies and processes. Linda provided some great resources that we've posted that can really help you with some checkoff lists. Finally, there are some cases in which multiple institutions and districts might work together to develop system-wide or multi-institutional agreements, and which is great because it can really promote a lot of efficiencies and whatnot. And also, given that whether it's a UW campus or a technical college district, that there are variances in courses that are offered, it's really important that whenever possible that you include what is common to all of the institutions and be clear about that. And when there are differences, I recommend that those differences be stated. I have seen some system-wide agreements come through that will direct the student back to another district or institution for additional information. And we're not going to publish agreements that aren't transparent and that the student isn't going to find useful. So it might do a lot to create an agreement between your district and institution, but if it's not going to provide value to the end user, it's kind of hard to know, well, exactly what courses will that student need to take. So what we would recommend using the template, you could easily use the first page of the template that we provided to provide some of the general common pieces, and then you could use the second place and have something that's unique to every district or every diet that you're talking about. And I know that that is something that you're doing anyway because you can't implement an agreement without doing that. It's useful that we get that information when we receive the final agreements, rather than just a one-page document that gives some general oversight and we're not quite sure what it means in practice. All right, I want to point out a couple of resources for the UW Stout example. In your materials, there's an example of external processes to build agreements that's working with the UW institution and the technical college district. It really includes nitty-gritty details of steps to take to evaluate credit. Linda also created a quick checklist of internal articulation processes. And when we open up the lines, I'm going to hold off, Linda, when we open up the lines to questions and answers, I'll let you pipe in if there's anything in particular about your process example that you found particularly helpful at your institution. After, in the midst of or when you're complete with your work, we have a couple of processes that need to be followed if we're going to get your articulation agreement in our database and published on our transfer portal. So we ask that early on as possible, that you submit a draft. You aren't required to do so. However, we really appreciate the chance to provide some feedback if you would like to receive that. And it can also ensure that it has the proper elements so that we are able to publish your agreement. UW is the source of the information, though I'm happy to talk to folks at technical colleges as you are putting together agreements for your districts. And in the end, when we get the final agreement, we are expecting it to come from the UW institution. Once the articulation agreement is received by us, the final signed articulation, we review it. We might reach back out to an institution if we have some questions. We enter it into our database. This data is reported annually. It's part of our accountability report. And the agreement is posted to the Transfer Wisconsin website, and in that we include a URL link to the UW institution so we can make sure that you have the most current agreement. If we find out we have a broken link, we'll also reach out to you. And so ultimately, this is the articulation agreement page that you can access through transfer tools at the wisconsin.edu/transfer website. You can access the agreements by program area. There's a button that is somewhat unclear, but you can see to your right. And then you can also, on that same page, scroll down and you will see articulation agreements by UW campus and by technical college campus. And then all of these just generally will drop down so students can see the link to these agreements. And we include this information and links and information to it in our transfer brochures, and technical colleges, if you ever need any additional resources regarding those brochures or whatnot to share with your students, you can certainly reach out to us. So this is a little bit directed to UWs and more informational for technical colleges. We do have to maintain articulation data, and there's a couple reasons why we want to do this. First, we want to make sure that our students and the public have the most accurate information available. As well, we use our articulation database to satisfy some statutory requirements regarding publication of agreements between the Wisconsin technical colleges and the UWs, as well as statutory requirements regarding accountability where we report on these. I'd say there's actually a third use for that, and we use it in program array in terms of program planning, and when new degree programs are being proposed in the UW system, we sometimes will get asked to look up articulation agreements that we have between institutions in a specific program area. So it's really useful to make sure that our information is up to date as possible. So this year, we are creating the routine that we will coincide this a bit with our program planning and review annual review process, but you'll get it a little bit earlier. All of the contacts that UW institutions identified as their primary articulation of contact will receive 2 different lists. And one list will be of all information of articulation agreements that are currently active and published, and the other one will be of unpublished agreements that have unconfirmed data. It might be that there's a question of whether it's intended to be an articulation agreement. There might be a question about effective dates. It could be we don't have a URL. There's a number of different reasons, but we'll explain that to you when we send out this memo in May. Then we'll ask that you review and submit your updates and send them back to us at UW System so that we can update our database and publish the validated data to Transfer Wisconsin and use it for our accountability reporting. Okay, so I am down to my last bullet point, and this is an opportunity for us to have some additional discussion and take questions, or for those of you that are experts in terms of creating articulation agreements at your particular campus, we really welcome any thoughts that in terms of your experiences. So we've opened up the lines, and please share your questions.
Hi, Diane. This is Ann Camp at NWTC in Green Bay.
Hi, Ann.
Hi. A question I'd have for all of us so that I'm clear is if an agreement is validated and published and it's on the appropriate website, what's the cycle time for changing? Meaning that often at the technical college level, if we're advising a first semester student who is looking at transferring, they're probably 2 years out. So they're building a plan so that that opportunity will exist. And if all of a sudden year 2 that transfer opportunity is no longer available, they will be building a transfer path that doesn't actually transfer. So I guess my question is about cycle time for accuracy on the web. Is it an annual update, or is it whenever anything changes?
So first of all, on the articulation agreement itself, you should see, and I realize that we don't have this with absolutely everyone. We would like to see it in every articulation agreement. There should be an effective date and a review date. So if you see that there is a review date that you think might cause some issues in terms of when your student would transfer, or if you don't see a review date, I would recommend that you contact the campus that you're looking at to just make sure what cycle that they're on. We recommend reviews that coincide with the program review, and that could be 5 to 7 years in terms, depending on what the institution's review cycle is. So that could be something that you would anticipate, but I would actually check with the institution. We do see some that go out a bit longer. I will also, I'm going to, in a moment, just ask to our UW representatives to give their answer to this question. The last thing I would say is one thing that you can do as a technical college district when you're negotiating these agreements with a UW campus is you talk about these issues. So what do you do if a student's coming in on the end of the cycle, and is it honored the day that the student matriculates at your institution after a certain amount of time? I think that those are good conversations to have when you're actually building an agreement. Does anybody at one of the UWs have anything to add?
Diane, it's Linda at Stout.
Hi, Linda.
Hi. What I'll usually tell students is I'll go with the UW system transfer policy and extend it beyond the UW colleges, and at the time they start working with me, as long as they're continually enrolled from there to Stout, we would honor it. But if there's changes made on our side, I always encourage them to consider the new plan because it is the newest plan, and there may not be significant enough changes to make that great of a difference. So it's always best to go with the latest, but there's a bit of wiggle room that might be able to be allowed for the students.
Thanks for your input, Linda. Any other comments, or Anne, do we get at what you were asking?
Yeah, I think that's sort of what I anticipated, just trying to advocate for the student, because I think they don't always ask. And when we publicly publish in any kind of web tool, it's only as good as the accuracy. So good advice, though.
Thanks. Thanks. Other questions?
Hey, hi, Linda. Diane, Scott Jones from UWL. How are you?
Hi, Scott.
Any guideline from system or other campuses with regard to when to sunset an articulation? I have a couple in mind. You might know one of them. Could you respond to that, please?
Sure. So again, I think that it's useful to think about what your own program review cycles are at your institution. And with that in mind, and I'm going to point out another practice that UW Stout employed about in their articulation agreement, they were clear about when they would look at whether or not that articulation agreement would be renewed. And so if there's clarity in the language regarding an articulation agreement, then that gives the UW and the district a known date and opportunity as to when they're going to talk about continuing this articulation agreement and sunsetting it, or looking at different opportunities if programs have changed significantly, because they can change significantly in a 7-year period of time. You know, my opinion is that if articulation agreements get too stale and they get to be more than 10 years of age, it starts to make me nervous to even have them out there. And so I'm trying to scan, and I'm looking at Anne and Katie to think if they can think of any that are that old in our database. But we will certainly in the review process reach out to institutions, because really old, stale articulation agreements are pretty sunsetted. I don't know how relevant they can be, just presuming that curricula is going to change over that period of time. So I can't tell you exactly when something should sunset. I would say lacking a consistent review, you know, institutions should really take a look at whether they're relevant any longer. I think the more current the agreement, the better value we have to our students and the clarity.
Scott, again from UWL. Diane, can I ask one more question?
Sure, Scott.
Been approached by Western Technical College to explore some 1+3 options, and you had mentioned earlier that articulation agreements assume completion of an associate degree. So if that were something that we were looking to do and to publish, is that something we would just put on our own website? System would not be involved with?
It's possible to have it published. You know, you remember these policies are published at a certain point in time. A lot has happened in the realm of micro-credentialing and whatnot. So if your institution decides this is an articulated agreement, what is important is the definition of what the student must complete. So in a classic articulation agreement, that easiest piece is a degree program and mapping that out. If it's a piece sub of that, it would be the clarity of this is the program that the student is entered in, this is the specific curriculum and coursework that must be completed, and this is specifically how it will transfer and the remaining requirements for the program. And if it has all those elements along with the other elements that we have for articulation agreements, we will include it on. But just, you know, to make it clear for the student in terms of when the right time to transfer is. I would also encourage, again, for those models that, first of all, if there is any dual enrollment involved, that you tell us about that, because then we record it in a different place. But also, if the student will be transferring early after only a year, then what kind of reverse transfer agreement might you do within that program so that when the student finishes that second year or however, whatever credits that might have been transferable back to complete a degree at Western, that student has a credential midway that they can leverage for that value.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Diane, this is Katie Roberts. Again, I apologize. I have one more piece of information that I wanted to remind everyone that there is an intersecting interest professional development opportunity at the end of May at the Heidel House that is has been going on for the last 15 years, and it's an opportunity for articulation conversations. It is May 25 and 26, and you could get more information from Tammy Bartholomew at the Wisconsin Early Childhood Association. Obviously, it's geared more towards early childhood, but one of the focuses has been collaborations between 2 years, 4 years, public and private.
Thanks, Kate.
Sure.
Diane, this is Ann Camps again.
Hi.
Hi. Just another question. As we're looking at the site, there's two ways it looks like you can look at the articulation agreements. You can either look them up by UW Partner College, or you can look it up by the WTCS College. And so if I use nursing as the example, I do not see nursing under UWGB as an option for articulation. However, under NWTC, I do see nursing, and it's a statewide collaborative agreement with none of the dates that you referenced, so the review date and the effective date, and no signatures. So I'm not quite sure what that means.
I can tell you what that means. It means I know that there was a review of the BSN online. I don't think we ever got a final copy of it. So if we don't get a final copy, we can't publish. So somebody send us a final copy. And secondly, for us to link back out to a link to that agreement, there needs to be a URL published. And the last time we looked, there was not a URL available at the institution. And I don't mean to put my UW Green Bay colleagues on the spot. Maybe that's been corrected since that point in time. So what I would say that might be in the interest of everyone involved in the BSN online program is that that we get the information we need, and we also have links to those resources so we can publish all the information. That's what's missing. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I really thank everyone for joining us. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me and send your questions to me. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and please feel free to share all these resources with others that you may feel will be helped by them on your campus. Have a great afternoon.